The planet of Velara was dying. Its skies, once bright with twin suns, now hung heavy with gray clouds and ash. The oceans had turned black and the land was cracked and barren. Velara's people, gentle and fragile, struggled to survive. Crops no longer grew. Rivers had become poison. Every day brought hunger, sickness, and fear. The people whispered to one another in quiet desperation, praying for a miracle that never came. Among them, a young scientist named Elira refused to give up hope. She worked tirelessly in her small laboratory, tinkering with machines and drones. Each day she launched a signal into the vast emptiness of space. Each day she prayed that some distant world would hear their plea. The message was simple but desperate. We are dying. Please help us. We have nowhere left to turn. For years the galaxy did not answer. Some intercepted the messages and ignored them. Others replied with polite but meaningless words, promising aid that never arrived. Entire civilizations passed by Velara's cries without a single thought. The Velarian Council grew weary. Perhaps we are not meant to survive, they whispered, their voices heavy with hopelessness. Elira, however, could not accept that. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, of how they had once lived in harmony with the stars, exploring the universe with courage and curiosity. She remembered their laughter, their songs, and their dreams. She remembered the children who once ran in the fields under sunlight, who now hid in the ruins of crumbling cities. She tightened her grip on her instruments and whispered to herself, "Someone must hear us. Someone must care." Then, one cold, silent night, something unusual appeared on the horizon. A shadow moved across the stars, massive and jagged. The Velarian people froze in fear, staring as the unknown vessels descended. They were unlike any craft Velara had ever seen. Sharp, armored, and intimidating, they looked built for war. Every Velarian felt a shiver run down their spine. The ships landed with a thunderous roar, shaking the ground beneath them. Elira ran outside, her heart pounding. From the largest ship came a figure, tall, broad, wearing armor that gleamed faintly under the gray skies. His presence was commanding, yet there was a strange calmness about him. He spoke in a voice deep and steady, attempting their language but with a strange accent. "We saw your calls. No one else answered. We are here." Elira could barely believe her ears. You understand us?" she stammered, her voice trembling with hope and disbelief. The figure nodded. "Yes, we know what you need. We do not turn away." The people of Velara stared, unsure whether to flee or to cry. They had long feared visitors from the stars. Often tales told of other worlds conquering or exploiting those too weak to defend themselves. But these beings, these humans, did not act like invaders. They moved carefully among the ruins, carrying strange machines that hummed with energy, purifying water, reinforcing buildings, and tending to the sick. Elira watched tears fill her eyes as she saw them. Children who had not smiled in years reached out, and the humans knelt to their level, lifting them into their arms, making jokes and speaking softly. She saw families reunited, sickness treated, and hope returning like sunlight piercing a stormy sky. One of the humans, a taller figure with silver streaks in his hair, approached Elira. "I am Commander Rick," he said. "We are Deathworlders. We survive where others fail, and we came because no one else would." Elira felt a mixture of awe and relief. Deathworlders, she thought. The word sounded terrifying yet comforting. These were beings who had faced death countless times and had learned to endure, and now they were here not to conquer, not to exploit, but to save. The council watched from a distance, skeptical and wary. "Why would they help us?" one elder whispered. "Surely they have their own wars, their own worlds." But Rick's presence alone answered their doubts. He and his crew worked tirelessly, night and day, with a determination that Velara had never seen. They carried children to safety, rebuilt homes, and purified the poisoned rivers. Every act of care, every sacrifice, every smile given to the Velarian people was a message stronger than words. You are not alone. You will survive. Elira felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where Velara's skies were bright again, where children could laugh freely, and where life could flourish. And in that quiet, fragile moment, she understood something profound. Even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, help could come from the most unexpected places. The shadow of the Deathworlders loomed over the barren world, but this time, It did not bring fear. It brought life. The humans, or Deathworlders as they called themselves, moved with a strange confidence across Valara's broken lands. Their ships had landed like jagged mountains, casting long shadows over the ruined cities. The Valarian people, still cautious and frightened, watched from a distance. Many had never seen beings like these before. Broad-shouldered, armored, and strangely resilient, the humans seemed almost unstoppable, yet they carried no expression of malice. Commander Reek and his crew wasted no time. They began with the cities closest to collapse. Homes were reinforced with heavy frames, roofs patched, walls stabilized. Machines hummed, pumping clean water into broken pipes and purifying rivers that had long been poisoned. Humans worked side by side with Valarian volunteers, teaching them how to rebuild and survive. Elira could hardly believe her eyes. She followed the humans through the city streets, watching as they lifted debris heavier than any Valarian could manage, cleared rubble, and rescued families trapped under crumbling buildings. Children who had stopped smiling for years ran alongside them, laughing and shouting with joy. The humans crouched down to play with them, speaking softly in broken Valarian. One young girl, no older than 6, ran to Elira with a small flower she had found growing in the dirt. "They brought life back," the girl cried, holding the fragile bloom out. Elira's heart ached and swelled with hope at the same time. Even in a world as broken as Valara, life could still bloom. Rick gathered the council in what remained of the central hall. His voice was calm, firm, and strangely reassuring. "Your world is fragile," he said, "but it can survive. We have trained on worlds far harsher than this one. We know how to endure, and we are here to make sure Valara survives." The council members whispered among themselves, some skeptical, some fearful. They had seen empires fall. They had seen other species claim worlds for greed or conquest. Yet these humans, these Deathworlders, did not act like conquerors. They did not demand tribute or claim land. They acted as protectors. One council member asked, "Why would you care for a world no one else cares for?" Rick's eyes scanned the horizon, his voice steady. "Because no call for help should ever go unanswered. Because life, no matter how small or fragile, deserves a chance. We are trained to survive, to endure, and to protect. That is what we do." The humans worked tirelessly day and night, often ignoring exhaustion. Elira followed them into the northern districts where the damage was worst. Buildings had collapsed entirely, and the Valarian engineers despaired. But the humans had no hesitation. With heavy cranes and their own strength, they lifted massive debris, creating pathways and rescuing trapped people. Elira watched one human lift a stone wall that could have crushed her in a heartbeat. He smiled at her and said, "We do this because it matters. Your life matters." The words struck her like fire. She had spent years believing that no one in the galaxy cared, that every world was alone, fending for itself. And now these humans, these terrifying Deathworlders, had come to prove her wrong. Night fell, and the Valarian people lit small fires in the streets. The humans stayed outside the damaged cities, keeping watch over the children and families, making sure no further accidents happened. Elira sat near a fire with several human engineers. She asked softly, "Do you always help worlds like ours?" One of them, a woman with dark eyes and calloused hands, looked at her and smiled. "We help worlds that call for it. Worlds that are in danger. We have lived on planets where death is constant. We know what it means to fight for life. We bring that with us wherever we go." Elira nodded slowly. She realized that the humans were not just strong, they were relentless. They did not turn away. They did not fear danger. They thrived where others would collapse. As the first week passed, Valara began to change. Rivers ran clearer, soil turned fertile again, and the people's faces, once pale and tired, began to show color. Children laughed and ran in the streets. The humans taught them techniques to purify water, rebuild homes, and grow crops in the poisoned soil. Even the elders, once hopeless, began to speak of a future for their world. Yet, despite the progress, Elira noticed something in the humans that made her heart pound. Their eyes, when scanning the horizon, were always alert. Their hands never stayed idle for long. Every action, every glance hinted at a readiness for danger. These were warriors, survivors of worlds far more hostile than Valara, and though they came as saviors, they were prepared for battle. One evening, as Elira walked through the rebuilt streets with Reek, she asked, "Will anyone ever harm us while you are here?" Rick looked up at the dark sky and shrugged slightly. Possibly. But if they do, they will find that Velara is not as weak as it once was. We will not fail. Elira felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, she believed that her people might survive, that their cries had been heard, that their world might not be abandoned after all. And as she looked at the humans moving among the ruins, guiding, protecting, and teaching, she realized a truth that would stay with her forever. The galaxy may have ignored Velara, but humanity, these Deathworlders, had come, and nothing would stop them from saving a world in need. The weeks of peace were fragile. Velara's skies had begun to clear, and the land slowly healed under the care of the humans. Children laughed in the streets, farmers planted new crops, and rivers ran clean once more. Yet deep in the shadowed forests of the northern continent, something stirred, something ancient and dangerous. The Velarian elders had long spoken of the shadow beasts, twisted creatures born from radiation and disease, survivors of the old wars that had scarred the planet. For decades they had hidden in the mountains and ruins, waiting. With the return of life and movement, the beasts began to emerge, hungry and furious, their eyes glowing with malice. It began at dusk. One small settlement near the northern forest sent a frantic signal to the humans. They come, the shadow beasts. They attack! Within minutes, humans were on the move. Elira joined Commander Rick and his team, her heart pounding. She had watched the humans work miracles, but she had never seen them face the threat of real battle. The first sight of the beasts made her gasp. They were enormous, grotesque, and fast, with jagged claws and teeth that could tear metal. Their shrieks echoed across the hills, a sound that made the Valerian blood run cold. The villagers fled toward the human lines, screaming, carrying children and the injured. Rick did not hesitate. "Hold the line!" he shouted, and the humans formed a protective barrier around the villagers. Their weapons were unlike anything Elira had ever seen. Energy rifles that fired concentrated beams, thick shields that could withstand a full strike, and traps that immobilized the creatures without killing them unnecessarily. The Valarian volunteers watched in awe as the humans fought. Every movement was precise, every strike calculated, yet there was a strange beauty in their ferocity. Humans were not cruel, they were efficient. They did not hesitate to protect life, even at their own risk. One human dove under a collapsing tree to save a child. Another deflected a claw that could have torn a man apart. Elira found herself caught between fear and admiration. She had always thought Valarian strength lay in careful planning and knowledge. But these humans, they thrived in chaos. They moved as if danger was a constant companion, and somehow that made them unstoppable. Hours passed. The shadow beasts pressed harder, their numbers growing as more emerged from the forest. Yet the humans did not falter. They coordinated, trapping groups of beasts, driving others back, all while keeping the villagers safe. Elira assisted where she could, operating drones to scout the forest and relay information. But every glance at the humans filled her with wonder. Rick moved to the front lines. His armor scorched in several places, his breathing steady. "We do not retreat," he said firmly to the humans beside him. "Not while life is at risk." "Protect Velara!" The battle raged through the night. Fires burned, shadows twisted, and the cries of the beasts filled the air. But slowly, human determination began to turn the tide. Traps immobilized the creatures, shields held the line, and the energy beams drove the beasts back into the forest. Elira could hardly keep her eyes from welling with tears. The humans were saving lives, not as rulers, but as guardians. Finally, as dawn broke over the northern hills, the shadow beasts had retreated. The villagers emerged from hiding, trembling but alive. Children ran into human arms, and elders knelt in gratitude, whispering prayers of thanks. Elira approached Rick, her voice shaky. You faced them!" "And won. Why? Why risk your lives for us?" Rick looked out over the recovering settlement, his eyes calm but fierce. "Because no life is worthless. We survive where others fail. If a world cries for help, it is not a choice to answer. It is a duty. That is what it means to be human." Elira felt a strange warmth inside her chest. It was not only hope, this was inspiration. She realized that humans were more than strong or brave. They were relentless, unyielding, and selfless in ways her people had never imagined. The villagers began to rebuild, but now they did so with a newfound courage. Where they once feared every shadow, they now faced it with hope. Elira saw them planting new crops even near the forest edges, cleaning water channels and repairing homes. They had seen death and destruction, but now they also saw survival, and it was possible. As the sun rose higher, the humans gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. But Rick stopped and looked at Elira. "We will stay," he said simply, "until you can survive this world on your own. You are learning. We are teaching. And when the time comes, you will not need us, but we will not abandon you before then." Elira nodded, tears in her eyes. She had spent years believing that Valara would die alone, that no one in the galaxy cared. Now she knew she had been wrong. The humans, the Deathworlders, had come, and they were more than saviors. They were hope incarnate. The shadow beasts may have returned to the forests, but the message was clear. Valara had allies now, and with the humans by their side, even the darkest night could not crush their world. The first light of dawn stretched over Valara, and for the first time in decades, the planet seemed alive. The air smelled sweet after a long rain, and the rivers once poisoned glimmered in the sunlight. The people who had cowered in fear and despair began to stir with a cautious sense of hope. Humans, Deathworlders, still patrolled the streets, but their presence was no longer frightening. It was reassuring. Elira walked among the rebuilt settlements, her eyes wide at the transformation. Homes had been patched, bridges repaired, and fields replanted with resilient crops introduced by the humans. The smallest sprouts now pushed through soil that had once been dry and cracked, proof that life could return even to a dying world. Children ran freely through the streets, laughing and shouting as if they had never known hunger or danger. Humans knelt to teach them, showing them how to climb safely, how to handle tools, and how to purify water. The children's laughter rang across the rebuilt towns, a sound Elira had thought she would never hear again. Elders who had spent years in despair walked openly, no longer trembling at the thought of another attack or another death. They observed the humans with cautious admiration. The Deathworlders did not only fight or repair, they taught patience, courage, and skill. Commander Reich gathered Elira and a small group of Valarian leaders near the central plaza. "Your world has potential," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You have survived centuries of neglect, disease, and disaster. But surviving is not enough. You must learn to thrive. We will teach you how." Elira felt a swell of pride and fear. Pride because her people were finally seeing a future. Fear because it would not be easy. Humans did not give hope lightly. They demanded effort, courage, and persistence. The lessons began immediately. Humans taught the Valarians to rebuild their water systems to withstand droughts and floods. They introduced methods of farming that worked even in poisoned soil. They trained the people in basic self-defense and survival tactics, showing them how to protect their towns from predators and disasters alike. For Elira, every day was a revelation. She watched as once fearful farmers became strong and capable. Children who had never held a tool learned to operate machinery and purify water. Even the elders began to smile, sharing knowledge of their own history and teaching the humans about Valara's culture. But the most profound change was in the people's hearts. Where despair had reigned, hope now blossomed. Families walked openly in the streets, unafraid. Communities worked together, sharing knowledge and resources. The people laughed, argued, and celebrated life once more. They had seen what humans could do, and they understood that survival was not a gift. It was earned through courage and unity. One evening, Elira stood with Reek atop a hill overlooking the largest settlement. Fires burned in small braziers, lighting the streets with warm, golden light. The villagers moved below, tending crops, repairing homes, and caring for children. For the first time in her life, Elira felt a profound sense of peace. "You've changed them," she said softly. "You've given them hope, but what will happen when you leave?" Rick looked out across the city, his expression steady. "We do not leave yet. You still have much to learn. But when the time comes, you will not need us. You will have learned to survive and to protect each other. That is what we teach. That is the human way." Elira nodded, tears in her eyes. She thought of the first weeks when humans had arrived amidst destruction and fear, and now she saw the difference they had made. Valara had been broken, almost lost. Now life thrived again, not fully, but enough to make the world worth fighting for. The people below were laughing, singing, and helping one another. Elira realized that survival was not only about food, water, or shelter. It was about the courage to keep living, the hope to keep trying, and the strength to protect one another. The humans stayed close to the settlements, but they also allowed the Valarians to begin reclaiming independence. Farmers worked alongside human teachers, learning techniques that would ensure their crops thrived long after the humans departed. Children learned basic defense and survival skills in games that taught courage without fear. That night, Elira walked through the central plaza, feeling the warmth of life returning. She saw families eating together, children running through fountains and elders exchanging smiles and stories. The world was not perfect, but it was alive. For the first time in her life, Elira allowed herself to dream. She imagined a Valara no longer at the mercy of the galaxy, no longer isolated and abandoned. She imagined a planet where people could survive anything because they had learned from the strongest and most determined beings in the galaxy, humans, the Deathworlders who thrived where others perished. And as Elira looked to the stars, she felt a burning truth in her heart. Valara had survived not because it was strong, but because humanity had answered the call when no one else did. And now hope had returned to stay. For months Valara had known peace. The rivers ran clear, the crops grew tall, and the laughter of children filled the streets. The humans, Deathworlders, remained among the people, teaching, guiding, and protecting. Elira had never felt so alive, so certain that her world could survive. But the galaxy has a way of testing hope. It began with the wind. At first it was just a whisper across the northern plains, bending the tall grasses and rattling windows. Villagers glanced nervously at the sky, but humans reassured them. "A storm comes. It is not stronger than life," one said. Within hours the wind turned violent. Dark clouds swallowed the twin suns and lightning split the sky. Torrential rain began to pour, washing through streets and farms alike. The Valarian people had never seen a storm of this magnitude. Homes shook, bridges groaned, and rivers threatened to overflow. Panic spread quickly. Elira raced to the central plaza with a group of humans. Commander Rick was already there, coordinating efforts. "We need to protect the people, the crops, and the rivers. We cannot let this storm take what we've rebuilt," he ordered. Humans moved swiftly, setting up barriers to divert floodwaters, reinforcing weak buildings, and evacuating families from vulnerable areas. Elira helped where she could, guiding villagers through waterlogged streets and carrying children to safety. The sound of the storm was deafening. Thunder rolled like drums of war, and rain pounded like 1,000 fists against metal and stone. Yet, even amidst the chaos, the humans remained unshaken. They moved with precision, speaking in calm voices, lifting fallen debris, and carrying supplies to those trapped. They worked as one, coordinated and relentless, facing danger with a courage the Valarian people could barely comprehend. One human engineer, a young man named Kyle, lifted a collapsed wall off a small family trapped beneath. He looked up at Elira and smiled through the rain. "Impossible is just a word. Nothing can stop life when it fights." Elira felt her heart tighten. She had seen humans face alien beasts, wars, and ruin, but this storm was nature itself, a force far beyond her comprehension. Yet the humans did not falter. They reminded her that survival was not only about strength but about persistence, determination, and the refusal to abandon others. Hours passed, and the storm raged on. Valarians huddled in makeshift shelters, clinging to the humans for safety. Children trembled, but the humans played quietly with them, telling stories, singing, and keeping hope alive even as the wind screamed outside. At one point, a massive flood threatened to sweep through the northern farms, carrying away months of hard work. Elira and several humans ran toward it, directing villagers to higher ground while the humans held up barriers with sheer strength. The water crashed against them, cold and unrelenting, but they held firm. Not one life was lost, not one child swept away. By dawn, the storm began to fade. The clouds broke apart, revealing the twin suns rising slowly over the battered landscape. The rain slowed, rivers returned to their beds, and the wind softened to a gentle whisper. Exhausted villagers emerged from their shelters, staring at the destruction and at what remained standing. The humans were everywhere, drenched and tired, but still vigilant. Commander Reek surveyed the settlement with calm eyes. "The storm tests us," he said softly. "It shows what we can endure, and it proves that life, if defended, can survive anything." Elira's gaze swept over the people. Despite the damage, despite the fear, Life had not been defeated. Villagers began clearing debris, repairing damaged buildings, and salvaging their fields. The humans stayed by their side, helping and encouraging, but also allowing them to begin reclaiming strength and independence. She realized something profound. Hope was not a gift. It was a choice. Each act of courage, every hand lifted to save another, every small victory against the storm was proof that Valara could endure. The humans had shown them the way, but it was the Valarian people themselves who now embraced it. Elira knelt beside a small child, holding her soaked hand. "See," she said, voice trembling. "We survived. We are alive, and we will rebuild again." The child smiled, and that smile felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Around them, life moved forward. The storm had been a trial, a reminder that the world was fragile, but it had also proven that determination, unity, and courage could overcome even the harshest forces. Commander Reich approached Elira and laid a hand on her shoulder. "You see now," he said quietly, "that survival is not given, it is fought for. And when life is worth fighting for, we answer the call no matter how dangerous it seems." Elira looked out over the settlement. The storm had tested them, but Valara had survived. Its people were stronger, braver, and wiser. And she knew one thing clearly. No matter what came next, humanity would stand with them, guiding, teaching, and protecting, until Valara could stand on its own. And for the first time in decades, Elira allowed herself to smile freely, knowing that hope was no longer fragile. It had been reborn. After the storm, Valara was quiet. The rivers ran strong, the winds were gentle, and the air smelled clean. For the first time in years, the people walked with steady steps, no longer trembling with fear. The humans, Deathworlders, remained among them, but their presence now felt like guidance rather than protection. They had taught Valara not only how to survive, but also how to believe in themselves. Elira moved through the streets of the northern settlement, watching children carry buckets of water they had purified themselves. Farmers examined soil and adjusted irrigation, smiling as new crops sprouted resiliently. Even the elders, who had spent years in despair, spoke confidently about rebuilding homes and preparing for the seasons ahead. Commander Reek observed from the hill above, standing tall as he watched the people work too. Together. "They are learning," he said quietly to Elira. "Not just skills, courage, unity. That is the hardest lesson." Elira nodded. The storm had tested them and they had survived. But now the true challenge was emerging, learning to believe in their own strength, to take ownership of their world without relying completely on the humans. Over the following weeks, the humans began to step back in subtle ways. They provided guidance but allowed the Valarians to make decisions. They watched as villages coordinated defenses, repaired infrastructure, and distributed supplies efficiently. Humans shared strategies, but they no longer directly intervened unless absolutely necessary. For Elira, this was both thrilling and frightening. She had grown dependent on the humans' strength, their wisdom, and their courage. Could her people truly stand alone? Could they survive without the Deathworlders at their side? The test came sooner than expected. A landslide in the northern mountains threatened a small settlement. Rocks and mud rushed toward homes, blocking escape routes. Villagers panicked, unsure of what to do. Rick and his team arrived quickly, but instead of taking control, they instructed the Valarian leaders. "You know what to do," Rick said. "Guide your people. Protect them. We are here only to support." Elira's heart raced as she coordinated efforts alongside the village council. They directed villagers to safe zones, created temporary barriers with sandbags, and rescued trapped families. The humans reinforced critical points but allowed the Valarians to lead. For hours they worked tirelessly. Sweat, mud, and fear covered everyone, but the people persevered. By nightfall, the landslide had been contained. Not one life was lost. Villagers cheered, hugging each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Elira felt a surge of pride unlike anything she had ever known. They had faced danger without relying solely on the humans, and they had succeeded. The people of Valara had begun to awaken to their own strength. The humans smiled quietly, their mission far from finished, but their role shifting. They were no longer saviors in the direct sense. They were teachers, mentors, and witnesses to a rebirth. Children ran to Elira and Rick, shouting, "We did it! We helped too!" Elira knelt and laughed. feeling the warmth of life spreading through the world. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with joy. "You all did it. We all did it." Reek placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression soft. "This is the most important lesson," he said. "It is one thing to survive when others protect you. It is another to survive when you protect yourselves and each other. That is the awakening of a world." The days passed and the settlement thrived like never before. Villagers took pride in their achievements, planning for future challenges with courage and confidence. Elira worked tirelessly, coordinating educational programs, teaching survival skills, and encouraging innovation. Humans helped when needed, but more often they stepped back, letting the Valarians make decisions, face risks, and find solutions on their own. At night, Elira walked to the hill overlooking the settlement. Fires burned warmly below, illuminating streets filled with life and laughter. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just toward the humans but also toward her people. They had endured so much and now they were awakening to the power within themselves. Commander Rake joined her silently. They watched the stars above and the twin moons reflected in the rivers below. "One day," Rake said softly, "you will no longer need us at all. Valara will survive because you believe in yourselves, because you are strong, because you fight for life, not for glory." Elira's eyes shimmered with tears. "We're learning, slowly, but we're learning, and it's more than just survival now. It's hope, courage, life." Rick nodded. "Yes, and when you carry this forward, no darkness, no storm, and no enemy can take it away. You have awakened." And in that quiet moment under the vast sky of Valara, Elira realized that her people had truly changed. The veil of despair had lifted, replaced with strength, unity, and hope. Life was no longer fragile, it was resilient. And the humans, the Deathworlders who had come when no one else answered, had shown them the way. Valara's awakening was complete. Years had passed since the Deathworlders first arrived on Valara. The planet, once broken and dying, now thrived. Rivers sparkled under the twin suns. Forests had begun to return and cities rose sturdy and bright. The people, once fragile and fearful, walked with strength and confidence. Their eyes held hope, their voices rang with laughter, and their hearts carried courage they had never known. Elira stood at the edge of the central plaza, watching children play in the gardens that humans had helped cultivate. Families tended crops with smiles on their faces. Even the elders who had once whispered prayers to dying skies now spoke of the future with pride and confidence. The world was alive, not merely surviving, but flourishing. Commander Rick approached her quietly, his footsteps light on the polished stone streets. "It is hard to believe this is the same world that called for help years ago," he said, his voice calm yet filled with warmth. Elira smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "It is more than I ever imagined. You gave us hope. You gave us life. You didn't just save us, you changed us." Rick shook his head gently. "No, you changed yourselves. We only showed you what was possible. That is what humans do. We answer the call when no one else will, and we remind others what courage looks like." The people of Valara had gathered in the plaza, preparing a ceremony. A monument had been constructed, a tall structure of polished stone and metals that gleamed in the sunlight. Carved upon it were words in both Valarian and human languages. No world left behind. No plea unanswered. We are the galaxy together. Elira joined Reek as the ceremony began. Villagers approached, placing flowers, holding children on their shoulders and sharing stories of survival, of courage, and of hope. They remembered the nights of fear, the storms, the attacks of the shadow beasts, and the moments when despair had seemed complete. And they remembered the humans who had arrived when no one else answered, carrying life into a dying world. A child ran forward holding a small, glowing flower that had grown from soil once poisoned beyond hope. She placed it at the base of the monument, looking up at Reek with wide eyes. "Thank you for saving us," she said softly. Rick knelt to meet her gaze, his expression gentle. "We didn't save you," he replied. "You saved yourselves. We only helped guide the way." Elira looked around at the people of Valara. The fear and despair of their past had been replaced by strength, courage, and unity. The people had learned to survive, to protect each other, and to thrive in a world that had once seemed lost, and it was humanity that had sparked this transformation. Not by conquest, Not by force, but by answering a call that no one else would. That night, Illyra stood under the stars, the twin moons reflecting in the rivers below. Humans and Valerians alike gathered around small fires, sharing stories and songs. The laughter of children echoed across the streets, carrying hope into every corner of the city. Rick stood beside her, gazing at the horizon. "One day," he said quietly, "we will leave Velara, but the lessons will remain. You will carry this forward. And when other worlds cry for help, perhaps you will answer the call, just as we answered yours." Illyra nodded, understanding fully. Humanity had shown them the way, but now it was time for Velara to stand on its own. And she believed they could. The humans spent the following weeks training the Valerians in final preparations: advanced survival techniques, governance, and leadership. Then, as dawn broke one morning, the ships lifted off, their engines humming like the heartbeat of the stars. Villagers waved, tears streaming down their faces, but with hearts full of gratitude rather than fear. Commander Rick turned to Illyra one last time. "Remember," he said, "life is precious. Courage is earned, and no call for help should ever go unanswered. That is what makes a world worth saving." As the ships disappeared into the sky, Illyra felt both sorrow and hope. Sorrow that the humans would leave, hope because their lessons remained. Velara was no longer a world abandoned. It was a world awakened, a world reborn. Years later, the story of the Deathworlders was told across the planet. Children learned of the humans who came when no one else would. Songs were sung of courage and unity. Villages thrived, cities grew stronger, and the planet's future shone brighter than the twin suns in its sky. Illyra, now older and wiser, walked through the streets of the capital, seeing life everywhere. She remembered the first night when humans had arrived, when despair had threatened to swallow the world, and she smiled, knowing that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, help could arrive, hope could be restored, and life could endure. Velara had survived. Velara had awakened, and the memory of the Deathworlders, humanity who thrived where others feared to tread, would forever remind the galaxy that no world was ever truly alone when courage and hope answer the call. The stars above twinkled gently, as if celebrating the rebirth of a world once abandoned, and now alive, vibrant, and strong. And